go ahead and get started. I am going to introduce to you Heath Adams and J.R. Johnson, and they are going to talk to you about the title of their presentation is An Apple a Day Keeps the Hacker Away, Good Security Habits for Your Healthcare Organization. So let's welcome Heath and J.R.
Thank you all. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about something that's not related to the conference itself. So this is going to be a little bit unique than anything else you're going to hear across the board, but very relevant for everybody, regardless of what industry you're in or where you work. Did a similar presentation to this last year. Got really good feedback on things that people just weren't aware of. And so the idea is for us to talk about kind of our experiences and some tips, tricks, some things that you guys can do to be more secure in your everyday lives, which will in turn make your organizations more secure, and so that kind of trickles down. So just a little bit of background about us. My name is JR. I am the principal security engineer and founder of Triaxiom Security. This is Heath. He is also the founder of a different security company, but we both worked together previously. We're friends, so we like doing stuff like this together. Our primary jobs are both consulting, more training, consulting, but ultimately we do what's called penetration testing. And so in the information security industry, this is basically where a company or business will hire our company to break into them in a variety of different ways. Maybe that's physically, maybe that is over the network, maybe that is a specific application we're targeting, whatever the scope may be, but basically to emulate what a hacker would do, what a bad guy would do, in order so they can understand how to fix those things. And so when we go into organizations and try and evaluate their security, we're trying to find all the different ways that an attacker could potentially get in, what exploits they could use, and then basically get them a head start on fixing it before an actual bad guy can take advantage of those things. And what we'll talk about today is a little bit of our background, just some background on terminology, things that you may not be familiar with in the security industry, just at a high level to make sure we're kind of all talking the same language. We'll talk a little bit about our specific experiences. We do a lot of work with healthcare organizations, hospitals, private practice, all across the board, healthcare tech, all those types of organizations that we've specifically worked with in the past and how that relates to security. And then we'll also talk a little bit about what you can do to protect yourselves. So those are those everyday tips, tricks that you can use to be more secure yourself, which will in turn make your organization more secure. And as we're going through this, if you have any questions, comments, or you want more information on something, feel free to stop us at any point. It's a lot better if this is interactive than us just up here droning the whole time. So if any questions do come up, just let us know. So first of all, a little bit about the key concepts, just some terminology so we can all kind of talk the same language. And so there's a lot of debate on the definitions of a lot of these things, even between us and the industry. So this isn't a field where there's been a lot of homogenization as far as the types of terms we use, the things that we provide as advice even isn't always the same. So it's still a young field that's changing extremely rapidly as tech changes, as new research is done from our side of the field. But overall, the broad field that we're talking about is information security, and just that we're talking about the security of information as a whole. So this could be information on a computer, it could be physical files, whatever it is that your organization is important to them, whatever that type of information is, the crown jewels, we'll call it, whatever makes them operate. For a lot of healthcare organizations, that's going to be EPHI. For healthcare tech, that may be intellectual property, things that they've used to develop their software. That's what we're focused on protecting in whatever way that we need to do that. Sometimes that's network security, all those other areas that I talked about. Penetration testing, I've kind of already gone over that, but that's basically what we do in order to try and find all of the issues or vulnerabilities associated with an organization in order so that they can fix them. So this is emulating threat actors that are out there. It's our job to act like the bad guys so organizations can protect themselves. And then the last one is kind of a different area, but it's a subset of penetration testing a lot of times, but it's the area of social engineering. So this is basically the broad concept term for things like phishing emails. When you get somebody that sends you an email to a free Amazon gift card that you've luckily just won, or when you get text messages from people trying to get you to visit a particular link, That all falls under social engineering. And we'll go through some examples in a little bit, but a lot of times it's more sophisticated when we're talking about social engineering targeting an organization than stuff that we all get in our everyday lives. Sometimes it is that simple, but a lot of times it's way more advanced. So it's helpful just to get a concept of what kind of level we're talking about and stuff like that.
The one that gets me is
Yeah.
like Adobe Acrobat Reader, the free one.
Mhm.
I don't know what it is, but when they Google search it, they seem to go somewhere, and they actually get something that can read PDFs, but it's malware, spyware. It's
Absolutely, yeah,
crazy. Like it
yeah.
actually looks like a real program.
Yeah, and that's the whole game is tricking people into do something that they otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah,
so a lot of
it
times
looks
that's a download.
legitimate
Yeah.
as
A lot of times it's a download and
screen
install. Yeah. Sometimes it's going to a link to enter in their credentials.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just talking to somebody on the phone and having a normal conversation, but over the course of that conversation, you're getting information as you're doing that. So all those things, absolutely right. And so why should you guys care about the topic of information security if you're not directly working in it or if you're not involved with it? I'm sure a lot of folks are directly involved with healthcare, indirectly involved. So what does this mean for you? Well, primarily, the goal of this is so that you can understand and just kind of have that level of awareness about information security. So when you're seeing things like this in your everyday life, or so you don't get scammed, or so you don't fall victim to one of these things that we're talking about. It'll overall help you avoid some attacks and risky behavior that maybe you didn't know before this that was risky, in fact. Some of the things that we look for or we want you to do, so you can just be a little bit more cognizant of that. And then if you're more secure in your everyday lives, kind of like I talked about, this trickles down to your organizations as well. So an organization, an organization can do everything in their power to fund their information security program, to secure their network, their applications, but there's still people that work at those organizations. And that's why social engineering continues to be one of the most prevalent forms of exploits that attackers are trying, because it's got really, really good ROI. So these individuals that work at organizations tend to be the weakest link, not necessarily because of anything they're doing wrong themselves. Maybe their organizations aren't training them appropriately, ultimately, but it's the easiest way for attackers to gain access. So now that there's all this focus on network security controls and application security controls, that tends to be just the path of least resistance. And then just to kind of give you some background information on why this is so important in healthcare specifically, we run across organizations all the time of different industries, different sizes, different levels of funding. And healthcare is one of those that tends to be a little bit further behind the rest. And we'll talk through some of the unique challenges there and why that's the case. But overall, the numbers are not particularly positive when you're looking at healthcare security as a whole. Now, some of the push through HIPAA and regulating EPHI and the network security controls around that is helping, but a lot of times organizations are doing those things to check the box. They're not actually doing the security stuff that goes along with it. And so when you see these surveys, so this is from almost 3 years ago, and these numbers of a fully functional security program, 16% of people that work in the organization are saying that. So if you work in your organization, you're saying, yeah, we don't have a fully functional security program. We're talking about large healthcare systems, hundreds of thousands of records, stuff that it's scary when you think about that, not only just healthcare records and disclosing personal information, but patient care can be affected. So, seeing the news, things like ransomware attacks affecting hospitals. When WannaCry broke out 3-4 years ago, that actually led to deaths in hospitals in the UK because their systems were locked up. They couldn't fall back to things quickly enough, and patient care was affected. So it is a very serious topic, and it's something that needs to be addressed, and there's a lot of organizations that are pushing that way. But in its current state, it's still got a ways to go. The other thing that's interesting is from this survey, 89% responded that they had patient data lost or stolen. So it's extremely prevalent, even various sizes of attacks, obviously. So there's maybe a couple records and maybe hundreds of thousands, but it's extremely prevalent in the healthcare industry to have these types of data breaches. Overall, healthcare has the highest number of attacks that are leveraging ransomware as compared to other industries. And again, we'll go through some of the unique challenges and why that's the case in a little bit, but it's a huge problem. And then overall, the average cost of a cyber attack in healthcare, over $3 million. So this is basically all of the recovery efforts, all of the communications efforts, legal fees, compliance fees that they have to pay once they've been breached. So to HHS, there's a fee structure there as well. There's a lot of money involved in this, but in a lot of cases, that's the average, but it's less than that. And sometimes people are literally gambling and saying, I would rather pay that amount than have a fully functional security program. So those are the kind of decisions and things that come into it because there's just not a lot of money in IT and security specifically within healthcare. So a lot of times those hospitals can't get the resources. The resources go to other machinery, other things. Good, I've talked enough.
All right. I enjoyed the Penn and Teller dynamic we had going.
Yeah, that's good.
So yeah, my name's Heath Adams, and we're going to be going over some story time, some hacks that we've done in the past. We're going to talk a lot about what is called open source intelligence. So a lot of us have data out there that we've intended to put out there, like social media, photographs. Some of us can be oversharing, or we think that we're not even oversharing. We can be, as I'm going to show you here. We also have a lot of this data that is compromised that we give to somebody and we entrust them with it, and then they get hacked and that data ends up online. So we can use a combination of this data to do a lot of things. Skip tracing, which is like finding people who leave, or we look at like missing persons, we look at child predators. OSINT can be used for a lot of good. And same thing with when we're assessing organizations and looking at companies, we look at the intelligence that's out there about you, and we use that to try to social engineer you, phish you, call you, look at your passwords that have been out there historically and try to use those against you. So there's a lot more data out there about you than you probably think there is. And this is just going to cover some examples of what that looks like from a few different perspectives. So when we talk about open source intelligence, this is a good example here of, this is a YouTuber, famous YouTuber who did a house tour. A lot of people like to post pictures of their house or post pictures of their views from outside. This is just off of a balcony of her new apartment. And so I took this photograph and I wanted to show that you can identify exactly where this person lives based on one still frame. So some details that we can see from this photo, we see in the background there, you can see like there's some tall buildings, maybe a downtown area. We've got a palm tree, which can indicate a few different places, but normally it's California or Vegas or Florida. We can see some of the ways the cars are facing on the street, how the street's angled. If we look specifically, we're kind of diagonally off a little bit. So if I'm picturing this, I'm thinking that there's kind of an S curve in the road where that hill is going upwards towards those buildings. So these are all good indicators. If we watch the YouTube video, we can get a little bit more information about her accent, where she's from, some ideas, and then start just piecing that together from this. So with that in mind, we go out and we start looking up tall buildings, and eventually we find some buildings that maybe match the description. This Westwood Village in Los Angeles, we start to see some of the similar tall buildings, and we see the one that's kind of off in the corner. If we go back one slide, we can see that that tall building that's out there, that's square. It's hard to see on the projector, but there's some words on it that we can't quite make out. But as we start to go and we look through it, does it actually work?
Yeah.
Hey, all right. So as we go, we're trying to see these words that are over here. We find this red building, we find this white building that's got this like weird top to it, and then we find this square building, which really matches what we had back there. We've got the square building. It's kind of hard to see, but we've got the white building back here, and then there's a red building that's also right here that we're looking at. So as we start to hunt that down and we find that we're in Westwood Village, we can zoom in on the photo. We can see that we've got some sort of tower here with a name on it. Once we figure out that that is the Oppenheimer Tower, we can start looking at the location of where this is at. So now it starts to become more clear. Hey, there's that building again. Here's those buildings next to it. There's like the rooftop that has this weird little angle on it. So we could start to say, okay, well, where in this photograph do we think she is? And from here, I can kind of already see it because we have this building and we know that there's a street going by it and it's kind of an S curve. And one thing from the original photo, if we go back and look, was there's some more detail that we can actually see here. Like right here, there's a grassy kind of berm. It could be a park, it could be, we don't know what it is, but we know there's a big grass area right here going up a street. So we start tying that information back in together. We can see that there is indeed down here, grassy little area. If you take that straight up the street, if we look at it at an angle, we can actually see here. So I would guess her house is somewhere down in this little area. So as we start to navigate and change the view of our screen, we can actually start to see it in a more appropriate view. There's that S-curve here that goes up. There's that Oppenheimer Tower. There's the berm. So she's now somewhere in this general vicinity, I'm guessing. And there's that building, if that points out anything that was next to her house. But as we start to look again at a closer view, there's her shot. And then we could see from her building. Also, we can see up here at the top, we don't see anything above her. So she's likely top floor. We don't see anything beyond this, so she's probably the second or maybe middle, depending on how many are here. We can see the palm trees. We start to try to identify these things in our photograph as we get closer and closer. So we're looking for balconies down here. We're looking for that building, this structure right here, which looks like a parking garage or a medical building of some sort. So my hunch is she's probably right here, somewhere in this top building of this office space. Start to continue on, and it starts to become a little bit more relevant here, where I think she's there. And then we come in, and you can actually take a look and see there's the building. That would be her exact apartment. And this is something that a photograph can easily identify you, and this is how we find people, bad people and good people, through methods like this. So that's just an example of scary OSINT and things that we can do with a photograph. So that's just more to say, hey, like, be careful what you're posting on the internet.
And one of the ways that we commonly tie that into, like, when we're looking at an organization, so this is more of a personal example, but take that and then imagine for an organization you work for. You post a picture when you and your buddies go out to lunch, for example, one day. Well, now we know roughly where your office is probably located because we know the lunch areas around there. So if I was going to try and target and get into that organization, I would go hang out there for lunch a couple days, see if I could see any badges. Maybe the badges themselves, like the employee badges, will actually be in the social media pictures. That's super convenient because then we can just fake those before we go on site to do it. Or we can go hang out there and try and clone a badge, so get in within a 3 to 6 foot radius. So we can actually clone one of your RFID badges and then just walk into the building using that. So those are the ways that OSINT can kind of lead us down that path before we ever even get on site to do anything. We have a ton of information that we can use and leverage that when we're attacking organizations or when we're trying to find or target individuals.
Exactly. Yeah. And people will post like desk photos, and that will, like, you think it's nothing, but then you can see if you zoom in on your computer, like what applications you're using, and that tells us a lot about it, because then we can say, oh, with your IT team, you got this application, we just need your password for it, whatever, and it just helps us. Every little bit of detail helps us with social engineering, and that's really what we're after, and that's what an attacker is going to be after as well. Another big mistake we see is people posting badge photos. When they get a new job, they're like, oh, look at my new job, or like they'll show the series of their badge photos as they got promotions. That's a great way to just copy your badge photo and use that to try to get on site. So the other thing that we talked about is data breaches. So we're going to talk now about what's called credential stuffing, and then we're going to talk about password spraying. I'll tell you the difference between these two. But data breaches happen all the time, and they can disclose a ton of information about you, and I'm going to show you how we can use that information to kind of track somebody down. And it's really like if you've ever watched like murder mysteries where they have like the red string and then it ties to different people and different things. There's a lot of data out there about you that you probably don't want to know. So what we do is we look up at this data and we try to determine who the individual is and what information we can find about them, even when we're not really finding anything at all. And then try to tie that down. And so with this, it's called credential stuffing. Basically, we're trying to find as many passwords as we can about you, information about you, and use that against you. And we've heard of attacks. There was one within the last couple of years of a baby monitor getting hacked, and people were freaking out, but it was more because of this than anything else. People were just grabbing usernames, passwords, trying them in login panels, and seeing where they worked. And that's the whole idea of credential stuffing. So I'm trying to see what your historical passwords are, and then if there's any patterns, like, I don't know, if we're in New Orleans, like Saints 2020, Saints 2021, Saints 2022. If I see a pattern, I'm going to go guess that and see if I can get in. So in this situation, we have here, this was from a recent assessment that we did, and we have a company we were attacking here. So we were trying to find this person. and we were able to find it. I tried to blur out the data, but their name started with an R, essentially. And then we were able to find something similar with an AOL.com email address. We weren't sure though, so we started to tie in, well, let's first look at the phone number, because this person maybe has a common name, maybe it's not the same person, we don't want to go attack a random stranger that's not in the scope of our engagement. So we start looking and we find the phone number, and we do a phone number search first. And well, we see the phone numbers actually match here. So we have that phone number match. Here we have an address, we have an email, we have a name, and a phone. So personal data, sensitive, not incredibly sensitive. There's no passwords are here yet. So we've got 4 results from our initial search on this. And then we can take the phone number and we can say, okay, well, I'm going to search on that phone number, and we're just going to find these 2 accounts here. So we know that this person at least matches. What we can do then is we can take that AOL account that we found, because we know now for sure that that's the same person, and now we've got 11 results that we can find out about this person. So these are all breaches that this person has been involved in, and this is a database that's accessible online, and it's very cheap to access.
So this is not anything special or anything that is hard to access. It's a website, anybody can go to it. It's $5, I think,
Yeah.
for a month.
Yeah.
So everyone has access to this data. And we can like kind of walk through this. If anybody's curious after we're done, we do have like an hour space after this, so we can kind of show you what information is out there about you, for example, or if you're curious, like what kind of things are in here. There's, I mean, like you said, data breaches happen all the time. So we're talking like there are tens of thousands of different instances of websites getting breached, and then that data being aggregated into search platforms like this.
Yep.
So it's very common.
So we can see here that we get a password of FLA is how it starts for this user. So now we've got a password for the user. As we start to tie that red string together, we can start to search on that password if it's unique enough, and then we can start to see, okay, well, not only do they have an AOL account, but they've also got an AT&T.net account. And then that just continues on. We would go and search the AT&T.net account and try to find details about them, and then we just continue that chain until we can no longer continue it on. And we can find email addresses that you've probably forgotten about, passwords that you don't even remember using. There's all kinds of data in here that we can just start to peel back. And this is how we find out old addresses, old phone numbers, everything that we can about you, and then use that in a very targeted attack. Okay, so the opposite of that, I guess not really opposite, but the other side of this is something called password spreading. This is where we try to use password policies against you, because humans are the weakest link of an organization. So if we give you an 8-character password policy, you're going to make it as memorable as possible. That could be summer 2022, password 1, company name 1, Saints 1, 2, 3, as we have in here. There are very bad 14-character passwords. So even if you have like a 14-character password policy, as you're going to see later on as we get into this, there are very bad, strong passwords. So we'll talk about how to create a good password and what the best practices are, but basically we just sweep through an organization and we try guessable passwords. What does a human want to use as a password? And here we can see that this is on a recent assessment. They're using winter 2021, successful, logged into their application, who knows what was inside of that, once they got in. So it's very commonplace for us to try those sorts of attacks and use them against you. So weak passwords, passwords that have been in breaches. So it's really good to search and see, like a good website is haveibeenpwned.com. Good to search that and just see if your email addresses appear in there. If they have, change your passwords. It's just best practice not to reuse your passwords over and over, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too.
For you in the next one. So the other thing with this, so it's kind of important to understand the background of like how we got to this point a little bit with password spraying, I think, and with credential stuffing, like Heath was talking about, basically where we're looking in the data breach, the dumped data breach information to tie your email addresses, your identity to passwords. Then we're trying to go log into your accounts with those passwords, kind of one at a time. That's a very slow manual process. We're trying to get information about an individual, target that individual, go log in. This is more of a shotgun approach. So this is a situation where we will go to LinkedIn and find every single employee for a company, well, at least everyone that has a presence on LinkedIn, which is usually a good percentage. Then we will get a search Google for the email format. So there's plenty of different websites you can use to find a good guess on an email format for an organization. Then we'll create a list of all of those employees. When we're talking about a healthcare organization, that could be 20,000 employees, for a large hospital system. That could be 500, it could be 10, whatever the case may be. We have all those employee names. So now we're just trying extremely weak passwords against all of those employee emails in an automated fashion. So this is going to be difficult to detect, and we only need to find one employee that has a bad password. And then once we get one valid account, the dominoes begin to fall. So that's kind of important for this context, is just understanding, like, for an organization, it's a very, very difficult task to stop something like this purely from technical measures, right? As Heath said, I can make a password policy that's 14 characters, but I promise you we guess 14 character passwords all the time because folks just don't want to try that hard. It seems difficult or it seems unachievable. They don't get training from the organization to understand how to choose a strong password. And so when you see something like this, winter 2021, I mean, what would you say, like 90% of assessments we do, we get access through a method like this?
Something like that.
So, I mean, yeah, that may even be higher than that, but it's very, very common. Yeah.
Organizations also don't help themselves because you have 14 character password requirement on 5 or 6 different systems.
Absolutely.
You're trying to remember. So you're making it memorable for yourself.
It's organizations make it very
every 90 days.
Exactly. That's one example, and especially for healthcare organizations, that is absolutely correct. And that's why the common recommendations now from a security perspective don't even include that anymore. So that's no longer recommended for this exact reason. So if you create a strong enough password, you shouldn't have to change it every 90 days. The problem is creating a strong enough password in the first place. So, and being aware. And so what organizations where they lack with situations where they have multiple applications or they have a long password policy, so they don't follow that up with training or the tools that individuals need in order to manage all those passwords. So a password policy is great, but if you don't explain to employees like some of the stuff that we're about to cover, so we're going to do it for the organizations here, but for their training, they don't go through like what makes a strong password or how a password is easily guessed like this, or how a password is easily cracked when we take it offline. So there's a lot of different nuance to how you can mess up this process. Technical controls will only get you 75% of the way there. So the last thing we want to talk through is social engineering. I'm going to walk through some of the campaigns we've used recently for organizations. And this is basically the process of we have an hour. We're good.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Thank you. It's like, dang, we've been
Right.
So social engineering is the process of attacking humans, not the computers, right? So we kind of talked about that baseline definition when we first got started, but this can be emails, this can be phone calls, this can be text messages, this can be in person. There's a variety of different formats where we're going to leverage social engineering. But the idea is really to either convince you to give us some sensitive information, maybe information that you don't know is sensitive but is helpful to us. A great example, like Heath just said, was like the software running on your computer. If we get version numbers or types of software, we can then craft exploits that are more successful. Or we could try and just go directly and capture your credentials. So I can just try and get you to go log into a site. It looks like the site that you're trying to log into, but in reality, it's one that I control. It's not yours. So I'll capture your credentials that way, then just go log into your email, whatever's exposed to the internet. The third option there is executing malicious code from an attachment. There are a lot of technical controls now that make this very difficult. It's a thorn in our side, so that's a good thing from an organization's perspective. So this is becoming less prevalent, I would say, but you still have to be concerned. Obviously everybody preaches, don't open weird attachments to an email. Well, it's for a reason. It's because we can get malicious code to execute that way a lot of times. So a couple examples of this. This is not necessarily the spam emails you're getting on a regular basis where it's a Nigerian prince trying to give you a couple $1 million. That's not really how this presents in practice. What it looks like is something a lot more like this. And so this is one we actually used on an assessment. This was a test email, so that's why you see everything blanked out there. But the core idea here and the psychology that goes behind this, there's a couple different things to point out. So when you're looking at this, it's going to be targeted to a person, and what we're trying to get them to do is log into this website. This entire email, everything here is just fluff. All I want to do is get you to click on this and go log into this website. So when we're talking about this, we're going to try and establish some familiarity. We're going to talk about, we're developing a new application. Maybe that's something we found via OSINT that's related to what they're doing or the industry they're in. It depends what kind of pretext we use there. Then we need to establish some urgency. We need to get you to do it quickly before you think about it. So the less time it takes between us sending you this and you taking the action, the more likely we are to be successful. If you don't have a chance for somebody to talk to you about it, don't ask questions, just go do the thing. So again, establishing that urgency, we need it done by a certain date. Should only take a couple minutes. So we want to act, we want to let them know that this is not going to be a long thing. This is going to be very quick, easy to complete. So once they go to this link is actually the exact same as their primary domain. So an organization's domain a lot of times will be, last year I picked on Atrium Health, so atrium.com, right? So in this case though, we're creating a website that is a lookalike, which is atrium.app. So if you're not paying attention to those last three characters, those are extremely important. So that's what's called the TLD, or the top level domain. And that is basically what is resolving to a specific IP address. So when your browser goes to this, it doesn't necessarily tie to atrium.com. It's a completely separate website. So it's very important that this is a recognizable link if you're going to visit a link, because it's very easy for us to crack links that are fake. So we can do things like change letters. So change an L to an I, for example, and it looks like the same thing, different website. We can change the TLD on the end. Again, different website. We can add subdomains to the front of it. So instead of www, we can make a site and then call it atrium.outlook.com. No, not Outlook, that's our site. So like those things all matter when you're looking at a link. And then the other thing here is really, again, all we're trying to get them to do, please log in using your network ID and password. That's the key here. We want them to go to this website, we want them to enter in their credentials, we capture those credentials in clear text, so we're done essentially. We don't have to crack them, we don't have to guess them, we have no further action required except for logging into something with those credentials. Okay. So another scenario that we'll use is, this is where we basically emulated a job recruiter. So a lot of times when we have an organization where we've already been successful getting credentials in another way, or we don't think there's a high likelihood of success with the other mechanism that I just talked about, we'll do something a little bit more targeted. And so this is what would be commonly referred to as spear phishing. We're basically using all of those OSINT principles to gather information about individuals and then using that information against them to better target this email. And so this was an example I created, but so this LinkedIn recruiter, this is a recruiter from a recruiting agency. She has a LinkedIn profile and she has 500, 600 connections, but she's not real. So it's very easy for anybody to establish that kind of person or identity. There's even sites now where you can literally create a fake person and it'll give you a headshot, a bio, a social media profile, and it's all made up. So the person doesn't even exist. But when I'm doing this, I'm going to use those points of familiarity I found in order to kind of establish some rapport and then hopefully lull them into a false sense of security. So first of all, you've been referred to me by several individuals. Everybody likes to feel good about themselves, so you're immediately pumping them up. Oh, they're happy, that's awesome. I believe you'd be a perfect fit for some role that's related to the person I'm targeting. So maybe it's the exact role, maybe it's slightly different, but it's something that's in their realm. And then in an area that is geographically close, so something that's reasonable if they live in that rough area. All of that information is just off their LinkedIn profile, so this is nothing that's secret. But just putting that into the email shows that I've done my research and that you should engage with me. The other thing is to just mention that we know where they currently work. So we're just saying you may be perfectly happy where you're at, but just give us a chance. And we'd like you to consider the salary my client is prepared to offer you. The second thing that everybody likes besides hearing good things about themselves is money. So having that kind of carrot on the stick to get them to kind of take this action is key. The other thing you'll notice here is that we've password protected this file. And so it's a small detail, but it's actually really important because when we password protect this file, it encrypts it. So it can allow us to get past certain spam filters and things like that. So it just has a higher likelihood of reaching its destination. And people like to think they're being secure, even though the password's in the same email, but whatever works. And so yeah, the whole goal here is not to get them to go to a link, but it's to get them to open this document. And within this document, it's got a job description, but when you open it, it's also got a macro embedded in it. And so a macro is basically just code that you can put into a Word document to take some action when somebody opens the document. Now, when you open the document, you actually have to click the little banner at the top. some of you have probably seen this before. It'll basically say enable macros when you open a specific document. You're like, I don't know what that is, but I want this banner to go away, so just enable it, get it out of the way. Well, what that's doing is it's allowing this document to execute code on your computer, any code that we put in there. So obviously when we're doing it, it's not going to be something that's malicious, but when an attacker is doing it, it's going to be ransomware, it's going to be some type of malware, it's going to be adware, something that's popping up advertisements and things on your computer. Whatever the case may be, that's their end goal, is to get you to open that and run that. Okay, so tying all of those things together on why this is a problem uniquely for healthcare before we get into kind of some of the ways to prevent it. Healthcare in general, again, is kind of underfunded in this area in a lot of ways. And so a lot of times they don't have dedicated IT resources, or they have that outsourced, or they have a woefully small IT team. You know, like I've worked with, probably 5,000 employee hospitals, and they had two guys that were running their IT team. How are they supposed to do that effectively? It's just setting them up for failure. And so even the organizations that do have security resources, though, a lot of times don't prioritize it. Again, that's not really their main job. The job of a healthcare organization is patient care, in most cases, or something adjacent to patient care, making sure that they have what they need for business operations, not necessarily securing information. And then in that same vein, healthcare professionals a lot of times can't be slowed down by security. So a lot of times an organization can make an employee do, multi-factor authentication is a great example, where you need your phone to log into something, with push notification or a code or something like that. But if you're in an ER, you don't want your doctor, your surgeon, fumbling with his phone trying to get into the EHR system. Like, that's not a great way to be. So there has to be some either compromises or special technology involved, whereas a lot of other industries, it just doesn't require that. The other challenge is medical device manufacturers often have security as an afterthought. They're getting better, so there has been steps forward recently, probably over the course of the last 5 years, I would say. But overall, they don't factor into security, and so it negatively affects their use when you try and bolt security on. So it's just not viable in a lot of cases.
So when you're talking about this, you're talking like devices that have like a Bravo device has to be plugged into.
Yes, exactly right. Like a Pixis. Thank you. That's another great example. Something that does need a network plug in the network in order to get medication out of it. But again, the primary job is not anything IT related. It just is connected to your network and needs to be to function. So those devices traditionally don't have great security. And so having those on a network is a liability in a lot of cases. And that's how a lot of these ransomware outbreaks, things like that, start, or why they are so bad in a lot of environments. And so some of those unique solutions that organizations are beginning to move to, and so we've seen a lot that are leveraging things like this. So instead of worrying about passwords, like I said, you don't want your surgeon typing in a 14-character password. So they use smart cards. They'll have a card and a PIN number associated with it. Perfectly fine. So the other problem is patching for devices is hard. So when I say patching, I mean installing updates on devices. So those medical devices we were just talking about, a lot of times there isn't even a patching process that exists. So the vendors put it out there. It's got a 20 to 25 year life cycle, and there is no way to apply a patch to it over the course of those 20 to 25 years. When you're talking about, let's say, something related to radiology, that's probably a $1 to $2 million device meant to last a long time. They're not just going to replace it, or they're not going to, change it if they don't have to. So they just don't get patched. And we've learned a lot about security over the course of the last 20 years, as it turns out. So it's probably a good idea to keep those things up to date. And then to tie it all into this, again, individual employees can play a role and they can contribute. So that's why we do a lot of these things. Heath does a ton of training for a lot of different communities. And really the goal is to just make everybody a little bit more secure in their everyday lives and make our jobs harder, when it comes to breaking into organizations.
All right, so we're going to talk about what can you do, which is, I think, our favorite section. So the key concepts for this section is going to be talking about how we can create strong passphrases as opposed to passwords. We're going to talk about enabling multi-factor authentication. We'll talk about using Password Manager, and of course, being aware of social engineering. So with that, let's look at how most of us create passwords.
That's all that's best.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, hopefully you guys can hear it. Just be quiet.
All right. So that brings us to the conversation of passwords versus passphrases. Lake does make a password exceptionally stronger mathematically, in the sense that if we're trying to truly brute force a password, the longer that it is, the more complex that it is, the more difficult it's going to take to mathematically get through that process. But the issue is we don't just make a 14 character jumbled password because we're not going to remember that. So we make it something that we can remember, and thus it becomes weak again. So what we recommend is using what are called passphrases. And with that, so there's the, was it correct horse battery staple is the common example that they give, but you just choose like 3 or 4 words. They can be dictionary words. It says do not, but like if it's long enough and it's just a jumbled sentence of random dictionary words, that's fine.
Or even a sentence of that is, you could make a sentence, it just needs to be longer, you know?
Correct. Like, yeah, any like 20, 30, whatever character sentence that means something to you and nobody else will be able to crack or guess is really what we're after. So you have to think about, even like if you're using a shorter password, dictionary words, misspelling them, making things hard to guess, because we are looking, and hackers are looking for the easy way in. So with the password spraying that you saw, we're just going to guess a password and spray it a bunch of accounts and just hope something sticks. Even when we're doing more targeted attacks and we're trying to go in and look at some of these breaches, a lot of these breaches are pulling down this data and information because they're taking what is a hash of a password and they're able to crack it because it's so weak. So you'll see, like, if you ever go and look through the databases, there are just password hashes that have never been cracked because those passwords were strong enough. Doesn't mean you shouldn't still change your password if it's compromised. Just means that, hey, good job. Right now, they can't crack that password. So it's one of those things that if we could start thinking differently about passwords and meeting requirements versus using a passphrase that you can remember but nobody else will be able to guess, you'll be much better off in getting your accounts compromised or not getting your accounts compromised.
Yeah, one of the examples that I use when I talk to people about this is you have to think about, even though a sentence seems simple when you write it down. So let's say, I don't know, I got married in March 2014, and that together, even though it's personal information, the way you put that sentence together has a lot of intricacy to it, right? Is March capitalized? Is there a period at the end? Is there spaces in the middle? There's a lot more you can do with that, but it's still easy to remember. So that's the thing, is we don't want to necessarily make passwords that are hard to remember, but we do want them to be more difficult to guess or more difficult to crack. And so the sentence is less crackable when it's longer, as Heath just said, and it's less guessable when there's a lot of entropy or different things that we need to figure out. So maybe I know that your anniversary is March 2014, but I don't know how you constructed that sentence. I don't know how that ties to you, or maybe you misspelled March, or maybe you used a different anniversary date because you wanted to mess with somebody.
That wasn't my password, thanks, Gary.
Yeah, no, it is our anniversary, but not your password, so it's good.
What's the longest password you've cracked?
Longest password we've cracked? 24, I can think off the top of my head. 24.
That's impressive.
Yeah, but it was really silly. It was the same thing repeated twice. Good. So, that's how people think, and that's why it doesn't, it should be, in theory, it should be impossible to crack a 24-character password. Yes. When you talk about brute forcing and pure computing speeds, we do have a ton more computing speed than we used to have, but we're talking about, like, I could feasibly brute force 9 characters. If I didn't know anything about it, I just wanted to try every single character, I could feasibly brute force 9. Above 9, because of how math works, and I'm not an expert here, but exponentially increases. Yes. So instead of 3 days to brute force something, it then becomes multiple years to brute force something. And
every character.
Every character, it increases. So by going from 9 to 12, we're talking about hundreds of years. Correct. Basically.
Correct. Okay, so multi-factor authentication. Hopefully, we all know what that is, but it's something you know, something you have, something you are. So if you enter a password and then your application or whatever it might be asks you for a token or a code, that's multi-factor authentication. If you present a card along with a PIN, that is multi-factor authentication. So this does mitigate at least somewhat, an attacker getting access to your account. It makes more work for us. Unless we're highly targeting your organization, hackers are lazy, honestly. They are looking for quick wins. They want to make money, get out. So they're going to look for the weakest link and then just move on. So multi-factor does stop attackers in their tracks. It has to add an aspect of social engineering. We have to call you up to do something else with you to interact, and a lot of times that will just stop an attacker in their tracks. So it's one of those things that is easy to implement and use, and should be implemented in all organizations. Okay, password managers. May have heard of password manager in the news recently. But so there are password managers out there where basically you just need to memorize one long phrase. So this is where your 40-character password can come into play, and then it will store the rest of your passwords. So I don't know the password of my bank account, my credit cards, anything. It's just some long jumbled password. Could never guess it in a million years. So it's one of those things that it's a database for your passwords. It's encrypted. It's stored safely. You can keep it offline if you want to do the offline method, just have a very strong password for that. And this allows you to just remember one password, and then when you go to like your bank, it'll autofill your password in once you type in that long password. So that way, if you do get compromised in one location, all your passwords are different everywhere else, and you don't have to worry about going and changing your password for every website because you're using the same password everywhere. So it's not the same thing as storing your password in your browser. So if you like type in your banking information, you say, yeah, I want to save my password, that gets stored in clear text, by the way, so we can decrypt that pretty easily. Anything to add there? Sorry.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, even from when we gave this similar talk last year, I've had 3 people come up to me that are in the room again that have had success stories about switching to a password manager since they've done it, and how happy they were, how much it made their lives easier. So it's a simple thing. I don't want to say it's simple. It is difficult to initially do, I should say.
Yes.
So the idea of kind of logging in and getting all of your credentials moved over to a password manager in a unique, strong system is going to take a little bit of time. But that shouldn't stop you from starting that process, because it will make your life easier at the end of the day. And as Heath said, I mean, if you have a password manager, I've got all my passwords right here. I've got all my passwords on my computer at home, but they're stored in a secure manner such that if I don't have that long phrase, nobody's getting them. The company that stores them doesn't know them. The company, if you could post them publicly online and nobody would be able to get access to them, based on the mathematical theory behind that. So
another advantage, because I use a password manager, that in 48 hours, if I'm not here anymore, my kids can get in and get to all my
absolutely,
accounts.
yeah, that is a really, really good
Yeah.
point that I've talked about a couple times, and really should add in here, because that is something where if you have a parent, a loved one, or something pass away and you can't get access to their accounts, that's going to be a really, really difficult thing to get over. Very stressful. You have to email a death certificate across the world to everybody and their mother, and so things like that can be very, very challenging. But with a password manager, something happens to me, we have a shared family account, so my wife has access to everything. We can share credentials for accounts that we need to use internally without having to set a stupid password for them. So like things like that make it really, really beneficial.
What if they crack the password you set up to get to the password manager?
So there's a lot of reasons. I don't want to get too technical, but there's a lot of reasons why that is extremely unlikely or impossible. Basically, the way in which they store that password is extremely, extremely strong. So, like I said, I was talking a little bit earlier about it, but I basically said you could post that hash of that password online publicly, and in theory, nobody would be able to crack it in a feasible amount of time. So because of the way they're storing those passwords, and they're using that phrase to then encrypt everything else, it's all uniquely encrypted and it's all stored in such a way that it can't. So the other thing about that, though, is you better not forget that one password, because that would be a problem.
I would say too, because if I want to load that manager on another device, I have to do a two-way or a multi-factor.
Multi-factor, exactly. Yes.
Get it loaded on another device.
So you have strong password, you have multi-factor authentication. That's your gate to all these passwords that are stored securely. Honestly, I tell people, when you create that long password, make it long and strong. If you have to write it down, go ahead and put it in a safe somewhere, just in case something happens. And then you're still going to be better off than using the same password everywhere, than storing passwords in your browser. You don't want to do that. If somebody breaks into your house, they're not trying to log into your password manager.
Yeah, and for
Yeah.
peace of mind, like I think we have differing password managers, but I use Bitwarden, which
Yeah.
is open source. So it's just one of those things where it's like publicly vetted. Everybody can review the source code.
Yeah.
So if there would be, if there was an attack against that, everybody kind of would know. Okay. So it's a little bit different than LastPass was who was in the news recently got hacked. I think for a second time. But again, the hashing is so strong that I don't think they're ever going to get the actual data.
I use LastPass because they just get hacked, so all their stuff gets released anyway. So I'll figure it out eventually. But when they do, they have the right response to those things, and they're using, because of those breaches that have happened in the past, they're very transparent about what they're doing to respond to those things. So I still feel fine. It was source code this time.
It was source code.
So it wasn't actually stored data, but it didn't matter. It could be open source like Bitwarden.
Exactly. So resisting social engineering, I'll just cover this real quick. Basically, everything you see on this slide, if it looks suspicious, it's better to be like suspicious of everything than to not be suspicious of anything. So it's one of those things that report it to your IT team. If you're unsure, don't open links. Don't ever give your password over the phone. Basic, just don't trust anybody. Common sense kind of thing. But it's one of those things that kind of make people prove who they are. If you're unsure, make somebody else go and check it out first before you open that email or before you open the attachment or whatever it might be. Suspicious people, depending on where you're at, always be cognizant of who's around you. You have no idea who a bad actor could be. It's one of those things that they do hire professional, they call it red teams for our side, but they do have nation states that will come and send people out to live where you live, to befriend you, to eat lunch where you eat lunch, try to figure out what your habits are, and try to get insider secrets and everything else. So there are some insane operations that go on in a day-to-day basis. So always be suspicious is my best advice when you're thinking about social engineering and thinking about other people.
And the larger the organization you work for, the larger the target you are, regardless of your role or position within that organization. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind as well. I would rather have the credentials of a secretary at a Fortune 100 business than the credentials of a CEO at a 10-person startup. The ROI, the value is significantly different. So that's something to keep in mind. Everybody could be a target for those kind of reasons.
And that is it. Questions?
In April and May, there was all these zero-day exploits. I think it was on Microsoft Windows. There wasn't a lot of news about it, but and they said there was things on people's computers for years just sitting there that are undetected. What can you do about that? It could have been 2 years ago that the employee clicked on an email or something and loaded some malware and sitting there, right?
Yeah, are you going to stop 0 days? No, they're going to constantly come out. It's more about response and reaction at that point. And so, when we talk to IT teams, are they using the correct responses when they see things like that? Are they going, do you log into the computer and run an antivirus scan and then walk away and call it a day?
Right.
Not the best idea. Are you doing some forensics? Are you doing imaging of those systems? Those are the things where you really have to pay more attention. I would say the everyday person doesn't really have to worry about that kind of stuff, but organizations, it's a losing battle.
Well, I was wondering too, because they gave Microsoft till June 15th to fix it, to patch it, but I never knew if it was really patched on all the Office computers or not.
Sure.
The update.
Yeah. No, it's a challenge, but even iPhone, Apple, there were 2 0 days that came out that had emergency patches pushed out to everybody's phone. So it happens on a regular basis. You can't do anything about that necessarily. So organizations struggle with passwords. They can't even dream of that point for the most part. So yeah.
Sure.
Any other questions? We got a couple minutes. Well, actually, we have an hour because there's no talk after this. So ask away.
What suggestions do you give to spouses who do not keep their passwords and you have to share banking information and such?
I force spouses to use a password manager.
So that was I was going to ask, because when you say password manager, obviously you followed up and there's different companies that follow.
Correct.
You're saying password manager.
Yes.
So I'll be talking to you again.
Yeah. So So Bitwarden, LastPass, 1Password, KeyPass, Dashlane. There's a ton out there. Yeah.
I can be nervous about even Googling passwords to Twitter.
Yeah. maybe don't use the Russian password managers, but like, yeah, I mean, you can Google it and get some information, but there's definitely options. So it's, yeah.
Maybe there's two versions of internet hosting for applications. From a security side, what is your take on that?
I would tell organizations, this is a very common thing that comes up, honestly, but I tell organizations that if you want to use a cloud-based platform that is from a reputable source, I would choose that 100% of the time over internally hosting something. If you think differently, you can
Nope.
argue, but
Agreed.
the problem with internally hosting something is then you are responsible for that care and feeding, and when you have a cloud-based application, they are responsible for that care and feeding. So as long as you trust the organization, it's a large organization or it's somebody that you've vetted. So it takes a little bit more effort to maybe vet that organization. But then once you're done, it's much less work on behalf of the IT team, and the less stuff that you're responsible for, the better off. So there may be some exceptions to that rule, but that's generally